go. Okay, chapter six. As we have mentioned, or I have mentioned at least, I like the analogy of the chess game. So if imagine everybody here knows basically how to play chess. But imagine you were explaining to someone who never played chess before, one of the first things we would have to describe to them is all the different pieces and what they do, and how each team has the same sets of pieces with absolute opposite and mutually exclusive agenda. That is, there's no cooperation between the white pieces and the black pieces. And in our context, there's no cooperation between the godly soul and the animal soul. Now, on the surface, that may appear to not be accurate because there are many times that the animal soul is perfectly happy to go along with the godly soul because, hey, I like going to shul. I find it interesting. I find it meaningful. I find it creates a great society. It creates great cooperation. It creates great civilizations and so on. However, the reason why that is not truly a co-functioning of both the animal soul and the godly soul is because of the driven agenda, meaning what is the purpose, what is the objective, or in Hebrew, what is the matara of their activity. The animal soul, the human soul, let's call it that, is its objective is what's good for me. And the godly soul's objective is what is in the service of Hashem. Now, it may in fact be the same action, but it's the driving force behind that action that is always going to separate out between the godly soul and the animal soul. They're never going to be in that kind of cooperation. Now, as we know, the Alter Rebbe did not write Tanya to teach us about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. We have, of course, dozens of libraries of books tell us all about that. So this isn't about the activity, because again, in the activity level, and when I say activity, that includes conscious thought, spoken word, indeed, the garments, as we've described them, the animal, the human soul, and the animating, or the human and the godly soul, the godly and human soul, can get along, like we described. But what the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya for is how we can have a vibrant, meaningful relationship with Hashem. And if my mitzvah actions are driven by what's in it for me, yes, I should still do them, and yes, it's still a mitzvah, etc. And yet, I haven't really done anything godly. I have not gotten over myself. I have not gotten beyond myself. And the distinctive mission of the Jewish people is precisely that, to, like I call it, get over yourself, to not be at all about me. Now, the Alter Rebbe begins this chapter with a quote, and it's one that we're going to revisit later as well. So it's a good one for us to try and commit to memory, which is "Zeh le'uma zeh asa Elikim," and the translation of that is "One against the other did God create." Many are familiar because it was popularized by a pop song from a quote from Koheles, from Shlomo HaMelech, where he talks about a time to be sad and a time for joy, a time for sadness, and so on. That everything has its parallel. And sometimes it manifests itself in hurry up, but don't rush. Take your time, but don't sit around, and so on. And it's very hard to navigate exactly where the encouragement is and where the limit is. But in our context, what the Alter Rebbe is telling us is that the chess game, both sides have the same tools, the same equipment, the same character traits. So the godly soul has the godly form of these character traits, the spheroids that we've talked about, and the human animating soul has the human animating form of these same traits. So one of the first things that we're going to be discussing is, well, how do we identify which one they are? Because it's not always so obviously binary, that sometimes what appears to be godly is really just driven by the self. So here we go. Perek Vav, chapter 6. V'hinei, zelu mazeh asa Elokim. Shlomo Melech writes, one opposite the other did Elokim make. Now, many are familiar that, and we have talked about this before, that Hashem uses a variety of different terms to describe himself. Meaning, when we ask the question, who is the narrator of Torah? Who's telling the story? Meaning, it's not written in the first person. In the beginning, I created heaven and earth. Then I spoke to Abraham. Then I called to Moshe. So it is Hashem describing the character in which he is invested in this event. So the first encounter of that is, of course, Elohim, the first pasuk in Torah. In the beginning of creation, created Elohim. So whenever we see Elohim, we're talking about God, the way he is invested in this physical world. So within the world of Elohim, and of course, even though the word Elohim is a singular word, but it has the last two letters that are associated with the plurality, multiple things. If they're masculine, they become an Elohim, they have an im, sefer books, farim, books. So this is Hashem that tolerates the appearance of opposition. So it's not Zelu Mazeh Asa Yudke Vavke, the four-letter name of Hashem, because at that level there is no opportunity or availability for opposition. It's only Zelu Mazeh Asa Elohim. Elohim can tolerate this level where there is this opposition. And of course, the classic question, which already the Talmud asks, and we will delve into it, why does Hashem, or not, why is not even the right question, but how is it possible for any entity to rebel against God when it is a creation of God? How can it go against God? Well, unfortunately, there's an answer to that, which is it conceals or it obfuscates or it hides from its awareness of its dependence on Hashem, or that it's created by Hashem. Just like, God forbid, in a physical sickness, the body rebels against itself, etc. But it's only within the realm of Elohim that you can have this phenomena of Zeh Lu'umas Zeh, this in opposition of this, joy and sorrow, godly wisdom, godly kindness, self-serving wisdom, self-serving kindness. And here the Alter Rebbe starts to elaborate. Ki kamoy shenefesh elikis klulim eser sviros kedushes umislabeshes b'shloisha levushim kedoshim. So here the Alter Rebbe lays this out, and while laying it out, he gives us some directives, some indicators as to how we can identify that which comes to us, that impulse that comes to us, or that character trait that is stirred within us, whether this is coming from the godly side or from the human animating side. Now remember, when we say human animating side, we don't mean evil. We're not talking about mitzvahs and averas. Again, as I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe did not have to write Tanya to teach you what to eat and what to not eat. We got 100 other books that teach you the laws of kashrus and teach you the laws of Shabbos and so on. We're driving here, to summarize it perhaps, in the self-serving versus the godly serving. So how can we identify them? Not only is the Alter Rebbe laying out the sort of the tools, or like the rules of chess, he's also helping us understand how, or what are the indicators that we can look for to find, to identify where that stimulus is coming from. So we're going to look very closely at these words, which are a summary of what we have learned over the last few chapters. So the Alter Rebbe says, just like the Nefesh Elokis is combined of 10 spheres of Kedusha. So it's a godly soul. It's going to be comprised of godly things. It's just like a person's DNA, every aspect of their DNA represents them. So whether it's a hair follicle or it's a more vital organ, it is absolutely unique to that person, and it bespeaks that person. So too, every aspect of the godly soul bespeaks godliness. Now we see this here because the Alter Rebbe emphasizes, and you'll see in the contrast, that these are the spheros and they are kedushos. Now we've already learned this word spheros. It comes from the word sapir, which can mean to tell a story, like a sipur. It can mean to count, like Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. So it's identifiable, and it says something. And it is sapir, it is radiant. So again, and we're going to play this out in greater detail when we see the contrast, A surefire sign of a godly character trait is that it embodies these adjectives. It tells us something, it's communicative, meaning if I tell you that you're number 16, that doesn't tell me anything except that there's 15 people ahead of me in line. It is also very specifically identifiable, like the numbers, and it bespeaks a radiance. It is expressive rather than repressive. So I am my person, but when I call customer service and I'm on hold, I'm just number 47. I have that kind of numbering has crushed my individuality and my identity. And the holy spheres express. So they are expressive, they are particular, and they tell us something about the origin, about the Nefesh Elokis. And they are invested in or expressed in the three garments. So garments, again, like a garment, it's not part of your very being, but it is expressive of you. It is tailored to your specific self as opposed to the room around you, which is not shaped by you. Your garment is shaped by you. And so it is a method through which we express ourselves. There are the three primary garments: what we consciously think about, called machshava, what we verbalize, called dibor, and what we do, called maisa. Maisa, machshava, dibor, maisa. Those are the three garments of expression, the way in which we express ourselves. And just as a reminder from the previous chapter, that just because we are currently expressing ourselves, or I should say, just because the godly soul is currently expressing itself in my conscious thought, spoken word, or deed, does not mean that that garment is somehow exclusively belonging to the godly soul. So, for just like I put on the hat, someone else could put on the hat. So I'm thinking godly thoughts. I'm using my power of thought to think about godliness, to think about holiness, to think about purpose, and so on. If I stop and I look over there and I come back, my human animal soul says, okay, but what about lunch? And what about me? And how am I going to? And so on. And that can happen pretty quickly, where I'm thinking about something godly. And again, the human animating soul is tugging on that garment and trying to wrest it from the godly soul and take control of it itself. Now, here the Alter Rebbe lays out for us the oppositional side, meaning, again, back to my chess analogy. I like my chess analogy. So I'm teaching the guy how to play chess. I said, oh, great, I'll just move all my pieces here and there. Not so fast, buddy. Well, why not? Because the opponent is moving his pieces here and there. And as the rule of chess, one square cannot be occupied by two different players. But I want to be there. Yeah, but he wants to be there too. Well, why are you getting in my way? Well, you're getting in his way. But I'm the right one. I mean, if maybe you've encountered people like this. It's not even it can be arrogance or it can be innocence. Like, well, why? What do you mean you don't want to do a mitzvah? That's what you're supposed to do. Amen. He's correct. Unfortunately, the animating human soul doesn't see it that way, unless you can convince me, which again, it's certainly a mitzvah. We're not here for good enough or better than nothing. We're here for what is the driving force. Why should I put on tefillin? Because it's a mitzvah. Why should I light Shabbos candles? Because it's a mitzvah. That's the ultimate purpose. Yes, we have to, or I shouldn't say we have to, but we commonly assuage the human animating soul by telling him how delicious the cholent is, so he'll come to shul, or how interesting Torah is, so he'll study Torah, or how valuable society will be if it follows the dictates of Torah. Ultimately, though, our purpose is to be in the service of Hashem, and it's a high level and a hard level to reach. So here, the Alter Rebbe gives us an indicator of when we or how we could possibly identify whether this stimulus that we're feeling is coming from the godly or the self-serving. Because look how he describes similarly but markedly differently the character of the human animating soul. Similarly, so there he's saying again, that's my chess analogy. They all got the same players. The nefesh of the sitra achra. Now, that's a very important term here. If you use the term sitra achra sort of colloquially, it's used to describe the bad guy, the enemy, the evil, death is part of sitra achra, the animal soul, the evil inclination, the angel of death. It's all in that genre of bad guys. However, more specifically or precisely, the word sitra achra simply means other side. Sitra side, achra other. Other side. It's the other side. The other side. What is it other than? It's other than total and absolute bittul. Other than total and absolute transparency to godliness. So it's not necessarily criminal. It's simply not godly. I mean, again, unfortunately, it's something that we have become so enamored with that we're in the middle of talking, and all of a sudden the guy goes, "Well, one second." Meaning, it's Sitra, I broke it. That's it. We're supposed to be communicating, and instead, I'm somewhere else. My mind is not there. Yes, I'm listening, but I'm not listening. I mean, I'm listening, but I'm only listening, and I'm not fully engaged. So Sitra Achra, again, colloquially, always is meant evil and horrible and terrible, which includes that too. In its essence, it's anything other than being focused on Hashem. So again, if we can imagine a highly focused machine or business or behavior, anything that is not absolutely contributory to the execution of that mission is Sitra Achra. It's a nuisance that gets in the way. So Sitra Achra, again, in our context, is not talking about Averas, because we got plenty of other books to tell you about what's a mitzvah and what's an Avera. Excuse me. Sitra Achra means anything that is not absolutely aligned with the infinity of Hashem. So here the Alter Rebbe says, how can we identify it? It comes miklipas noiga. Now remember, way back in I think the first chapter, the Alter Rebbe described that the human animating side of a Jew comes from klipas noiga. Now, what does that mean? Maybe you've heard this, I assume so, but maybe not. People say things like, well, it's a Jewish value to have family, and it's a Jewish value to be to feature scholarship, and it's a Jewish value to feature kindness. He's very Jewish in that way. Now, that's not a bad thing. I don't know if it's an accurate thing. It's a kind of nasty thing to say about Gentiles, where I think Gentiles don't value family and scholarship and so on. But whatever it is, the Alter Rebbe says that's true, that the natural human inclination is for good things. So then we have a really hard job, meaning if I'm innately a nasty person and I do something kind, then I have truly accessed my godliness because it is so buried beneath my layers and layers of selfish humanness that there's quote unquote no reasonable expectation that it's ever going to manifest itself. And again, sometimes this is heard in common language where people say, well, that's just the way I am. That's just the kind of person I am. I'm a very intense person, and therefore I'm very helpful, but I'm also very resentful, or I'm a very passionate person, so I'm really get involved, but I also lose my temper, or I'm a very calm person, so nothing bothers me, but I'm also very lazy, and oh well, that's just the way I am. And quote unquote, reasonably, that's just the way it's going to be, unless we access the infinity of Hashem and overcome it. So we are not beholden to our character. So here the Alter Rebbe describes that the Sitra Achra is still Klipas Noiga. Remember these two terms, very important terms, which we've seen before. We'll take a moment to review. Klipa means a shell, that which conceals. So a walnut is concealed by a shell. An orange is concealed by the orange peel. That shell can either suggest that there's something edible inside it, like an orange peel, or, again, if you didn't know, you would never imagine that underneath that walnut shell, there's actually something edible. And the only way to get there is to crush it. Whereas with the orange peel, you could imagine that there's something virtuous in there, something edible in there, and you don't have to crush it. You just got to peel it back a little bit. So too, the world that we encounter has some things in the extreme. Some things are absolutely obviously godly, whether it's a Torah scroll or it's a moment of holiness or it's being in a place of holiness, whatever it is, there are certain experiences which exist and they are obviously and exclusively holy. Meaning, I like the example of a lulav and an esrog. Yes, of course, these species exist independently, but I would never encounter them except for the mitzvah. Why would I ever even know what an esrog was? I'm sure there are thousands of forms of shrubbery in faraway places in Australia that exist, but they have nothing to do with me. The only reason why I encounter an esrog, and certainly why I pay $200 for it, is because it's a mitzvah. So when I see that, I see it exclusively as something in the service of Hashem or Shmura Matzah, whatever it is. Each person can hopefully identify some trait of this in their life. Conversely, there are some things that I can never even imagine that there's anything godly within them. They are so evil that I can't imagine that there's godliness in them, but there's got to be because nothing can exist without godliness. So that's like the walnut shell. I can't imagine. And the only way is to kind of cheat and say, well, I have to crush that and say it's not really what I see. Most of life, though, is neither one of those. Most of life is pens and pencils and cars and so forth, which I don't see them as immediately godly like the esrog, but it doesn't take a wild imagination to recognize that there's godliness within them. I'm using it in the service of Hashem. It must have godliness because, look, I can use it to serve Hashem. So it doesn't take wild imagination. It's not, like we might call it, crazy to think that there's godliness within them. It's just, I got to peel it back a little bit. So this is the description of the Sitra Achra as well. Meaning, why is it Sitra Achra? Because still it's not presenting itself as godliness. So we're not talking about Sitra Achra, like I said, like, God forbid, murder and idolatry and evil. We're talking about Sitra Achra, that it does not immediately present itself as godly, even though it is accessibly remediable, I can remedy it and make its godliness shine without having to crush it and without having to take it out and make it into something else. I use the computer as a computer, the pencil as a pencil, the car as a car, food as food, and I can make it into something godly. But still, it does not immediately present itself as godly. And that's the kind of sensitive, what we might call high level human animal soul that we're dealing with. So again, the human animal soul says, I'm evil and I want to do evil. It's a little simpler, although it could still be very tempting. It's a little simpler. I recognize it as evil. I recognize it as ungodly. And then I make a decision. Am I going to do something ungodly because it's just too delicious, or I'm not going to do it? But when it represents itself as something that's not so egregious, it's klipas noga. It's klipa. I mean, it's not obviously godly like a Torah, but you could see the godliness. It's very easy to delude myself into thinking that this is godliness. And we are reminded that this is Sitra Achra. And again, we could come up with many, many examples. One that I'll just throw out there, because we would never do because we're perfect, but other people that we may encounter who aren't as perfect as we are, the way, and I'm certainly guilty of it, we treat food. It's kosher, kosher, kosher. Well, just because it has 7 hechshers doesn't mean that it's evidently godly. It's klipas noiga, right? I can elevate it because it's kosher, and I can eat it in the service of Shabbos, but am I really? Or am I just indulging myself? And maybe this is more men than women, but if you see people on the buffet line, there ain't nothing so all that godly about the guy elbowing his way to get to the good roast beef. And so it's kosher. What do you mean? It's 100% kosher. And I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to, right. But in that moment, do I see that as godly as I see the Torah and the esrog? Or is it really no different than the way an animal would eat? Because he also eats because it's hungry. So again, this is the level. But the reason why I bring this up is because it's important that we remember, what do you mean? I keep kosher. It's kosher. I made a bracha. Okay. But what about now? So it's kosher. Animals also would eat kosher food, of course. And I made a bracha. Okay, that was a 5-second experience, if that. But now, while I'm eating, how is my eating different than an animal? That's sitra achra. If it doesn't bespeak godliness in the moment. Now, again, just to take eating as the example, because when we eat matzah, it bespeaks godliness, especially if we're crunch, 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 and so on. And we're eating the matzah, we're thinking, well, imagine if I ate like this all the time. Imagine if I always ate with the same kind of conscious awareness like I eat matzah. I probably wouldn't be overweight too. So he has another bonus. Okay, here we go. Hamalubeshes bedam ha'adam, which is embedded in the blood of the person. Now, again, when we say blood, what we mean generally, and not that we don't mean blood, is our biological function, meaning it's not blood, but not the secretions of the pancreas. We're not here to study biology. We're using the term blood as a general reminder or a general term for our humanity. Now, you recall that the Alter Rebbe mentioned that the difference between a human being and an animal is that an animal only lives for its life. Ki adam hu nefesh. For an animal, the only thing that motivates it, that prompts it, is continued existence. So why does an animal eat? Because he wants to live. Why does he want to live? No reason. He's just an impulse to live. And therefore he's got to eat. And then he lives, and then he works so that he can eat, and so on. Whereas a human being has the opportunity to eat in the service of something greater than just his blood. And again, like we eat matzah, like we eat maror, whatever it is, the different food mitzvahs that we do. Well, imagine if we always ate with that kind of consciousness. Imagine if we had lunch every day with the same awareness of godliness, like when we ate matzah at the Seder. If we had, and again, that's what we're talking about, which is the awareness thing. So, klipas noiga. Well, what's so bad about that? It's not bad in the classic sense, but it's sitra achra. It's not godliness. So if I want to be, imagine, connected with another person and they're on their phone type of thing, there's a breakdown. I'm listening, right? But I'm not fully present. Well, Hashem wants our complete and absolute undivided attention. So if we are distracted in that sense, then we're not aligned with Hashem. What are we aligned with? The other side. Sitra achra. So again, sitra achra doesn't mean evil, cruel, murder, and so on. It means not awareness of Hashem, not aligned with the infinity of Hashem. Okay. So here the Alter Rebbe says, Klula, what is it comprised of? So again, back to my chess analogy. But look what the Alter Rebbe says. Mi'esa kisrin de misabusa, 10 crowns of filth, shehein, which are sheva midos rois, the 7 bad character traits, habois mi'abri yisoidis roim hanal, that come from the 4 bad yisoidis that we mentioned before. We'll come back to this. I just want to get to a couple of terms here. The seichel hamelidon, and the intellect that bears them, hanechlak l'sholosh, which is divisible into 3, shehein chachma bina v'das, which are chachma bina and das, makar hamidas, the source of the midos, ki hamidos hein lefi erech haseichel, because midos are comparable to the intellect that bears them, as we explained, ki hakatan choshek v'oyev dvarim ketanim b'kus ya'erech, like a child who likes small and insignificant things because he has insignificant, undeveloped intellect. So if you tell the child you bought him a $10,000 bond for his birthday, he says, but I want a toy, because he doesn't understand what a $10,000 bond is. He doesn't want to wait, the marshmallow test. Some adults are that way. I don't want to know about what I'm going to get next week or next year. I want it right now. And I want the lollipop right now, not the $10,000 bond that you're telling me about that's going to come due in 5 years from now. It's not something I can imagine. The fisha sichlei, cotton, the kotza lahasig dvarim yakarib yosebihem, because the child is too limited to be able to comprehend that there's a greater value down the road. So he's obsessed with the toy that he didn't get rather than being enthusiastic about the um, the bond that he did get because it's not staring him in the face. And again, I just want to do a couple of more lines, then we'll come back. He also becomes angry and short-tempered for minor matters. And so too he becomes glorified by silly, childish things. Bashar midos and the other character traits. And these 10 levels, which are tame, invalid or unholy, when a person thinks about them, or medaber, or he speaks about them, or he does them, the 3 garments there. V'sharei varav nikroim levushe mesabel es bechinas elu hatmei shemaslapshes behen v'shas maisa o dibor o machshava. At that moment, his thought that's in his brain, the words in his mouth, the power of activity in his hands or other parts of his being, are called garments of filth to these 10 tamei, unholy levels that they have become invested in at the time that they do it, or, and that's crucial, we'll come to it, when they speak it, or when they think it. And these are kol hamaisim asher nasim tachas hashemesh, all deeds that are done, and this is a quote also from Koheles, from King Solomon, under the sun. We're going to revisit all of this. Asher hakol hevel, it is all substanceless, of no substance, like hot air. V'royes ruach, and of evil spirit. We'll talk about all of these phrases. Mashkasav b'zayar b'shalach shein teviru derucha chulu, like the Zohar describes, these are of broken spirits. So a lot going on here. I want to get the data down. Now, hopefully everybody saw the handout that I provided. I'll put it up here on the board for a moment so we can get a little bit of a compare and contrast from the way the Alter Rebbe describes the godly character traits, the 10 godly garments, in contrast to how we describe the 10 godly spheres versus how we describe the 10 human or animating and so on. So here we go. If we remember, the Alter Rebbe said that the neshama, the nefesh elokis, is comprised of 10. Some other question of 10 spheros kedoshis, 10 holy spheros. But here in the description of the animal soul, he describes them as 10. Again, that's the same crowns, not spheros, crowns of filth. Now, the filth part is kind of the obvious part, but the difference between crowns and spheros. What is the difference between crowns and spheros? Does people still want this up here? I could take it down if it's distracting. Everybody got it in the email, I hope. Okay, I'll take it down just because.
Keep it up if it's okay, Rabbi. I
Keep
didn't.
It up. Fine. Keeping it up there, no problem. So, what is the difference between crowns and spheros? So remember, we talked about that the word spheros, which we translate as expressions or something like that, it comes from all of those different words. Sapir, it's bright. That is, when we say bright, we mean that it's transparent. It allows the godliness to flow through. We described it as sipor. It tells us something. It communicates information. And we described it as sphera, like to count, like sphera sa'omer, in that it is precise in its identity. It is very lined up and perfectly slotted so that it is comprehended. So those are characteristics that bespeak holiness. The term crowns bespeak something very different. It sits on top of the head. It's not truly the person. And sometimes, again, try to use real life experience. Maybe you've observed this in other people, of course, that it's like a form of affectation. the person puts on a kind of character that's almost unnatural to them, that they are desirous of things that are not truly even part of themselves because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. They saw it in a movie, and therefore they're trying to live up to that level. They're trying to pretend to be something that they're not. So the term crown in this context is not a flattering term, but it's like a affectation. It's something that is put on to the person rather than something that is born of them. Now, when the Alter Rebbe starts to break down the 10 spheros of Kedusha, of holiness, he begins with the intellect. 3 of the intellect, 7 of the character. If I ask you outside of this context to describe the spheros, or to list the spheros, we're familiar with Chabad Chagas Nihim. 3 of the intellect, 7 of the character. Think it, feel it, do it. We've been through that. But here in the description of the 10 crowns, which again, the term crown indicating in this context that it's not godly, it's something separate from the person. The Alter Rebbe begins by describing the character, the Sheva Midos Rois, the 4 bad Midos that come from the 4 Yesodis. So a little lingo here, and then we'll come back. You recall, hopefully, that way back in the beginning of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe quotes this idea that everything in existence, we just had it in Rambam describes it in the beginning of his description of creation, is predicated on some form of combination of the 4 primary Yesodis, elements. And again, we're not here to study geology or creation. We're here for the conceptual idea. They are Eish, fire, Mayim, water, Ruach, air, Afar, dust. Now, again, like the Rambam, just to use that as to illustrate the point, the Rambam mentions that, for example, when it says that man comes from dust and returns to dust, that's the primary element. But man also contains the element of water and the element of air and so on. And everything ultimately will deteriorate back to its primary elements. The conceptual side of the elements are fire is everything from passion to anger. On the upside, it's passion. On the downside, it's anger. Water on the upside is basic survival. On the downside, it's indulgence. Dust is on the upside to be humble, to be rooted. On the downside, it's laziness and slothfulness and so on. And then you got ruach. Ruach is air. It's non-substantive. It's laziness. It's foolishness. And on the upside, it's tolerance and bypassing challenges and letting it, not making a big deal out of everything. And it's this kind of thing. So the Alter Rebbe describes that in Kedusha, in holiness, a surefire sign of holiness is that character is the product of the intellect. Again, we're upright human beings. This is an illustration the Alter Rebbe will lay out for us later on in Tanya. And therefore, think it, feel it, do it. The mind rules, it may have to overrule, but it shapes and cures the heart, which changes behavior. Think it, feel it, do it. Think it, feel it, do it. The animal soul starts with the midos. It starts with the character. Now, we're accustomed to using the word midos as being, good midos, but there are bad midos too, as the Alter Rebbe says here, midos rois. And midos rois, bad midos, is not murder and violation of Torah. It means anything that is not immediately aligned with the infinity of Hashem. So the animal soul begins with the midos. That's its premise. And what is shaping the midos? It's not the intellect. What's shaping the midos are the yesodis. Again, that's like, well, I'm just an angry person, or I'm just a passionate person, or I'm just a generous person. I'm just a generous person. I love to help other people. That's nice, but it's not in the service of Hashem. That's why we know the classic illustration. When does God see that Abraham is truly a servant? When Abraham does what Hashem doesn't want him to do. I'm sorry, when Abraham does what Abraham doesn't want. He does what Hashem wants him to do that he doesn't want to do. He brings his son up for the sacrifice. So when I say things, well, that makes sense to me. I'm saying I'm the arbiter of what will be done. I make the decisions around here, and God can put forward his suggestion. And if I agree with it, I'll do it. I mean, that is the essence of, now it doesn't mean I don't do it. I think kashrus is a good idea. I think this is a good idea. I think they're all good ideas. You're familiar with the Medrash that before God gave us the Torah, he offered it to the nations, and they said, well, what does it say? And then he told them the thing that he knew they wouldn't like. So what, are you playing a game here? Why don't you tell them 600 things they do like, and then maybe they'll be willing to give up the thing they don't like because they like all the other things. And because once they said, well, what does it say? That means I'll determine. And if you want to determine, then do what you want. If you want to do what you want to do whatever you want to do. But if you want to be aligned with me, then it has to be aligned with me, not, well, I'll think about it, and so on. So here, the Alter Rebbe describes the first indicator that something is ungodly is that it begins with the midas. And what are those midas based on? They're based on some intuitive, natural sense of law. Again, it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's not a godly thing. And again, our alternative is not godly or evil. Our alternative is godly or self-serving. So it's like the classic thing. Why do I need God to tell me not to murder? You don't. Cain killed Abel and he was punished. Why? It doesn't say not to do it. Right? That's intuitive. But then it's only a good thing. It's not a godly thing. And if you want it to be a godly thing, I got to have Har Sinai. Without Har Sinai, it's only a good thing, and it's not a godly thing. Because what's it based on? It's based on this elemental sense of the way the world is configured, that we are intuitively aligned, whether it's virtue or it's just self-serving compliance, meaning I'll stop at stop signs because I want you to stop at stop signs. Okay, that's a certain quality. And then we go to the seichel. So again, maybe this is not your experience, but in a very overly simplified illustration, that sort of first day of school, the teacher or the principal says, what do you want more than anything else in the world? Now go out there and do it. And follow your dreams and follow your passion and chart a course to achieve your greatest desires. Now, that sounds very inspiring and very uplifting, but it's got a number of flaws to it. First of all, how am I supposed to know? I'm 14. I don't know what my passions are. That's A. B, how do I know whether or not my passions are even within my ability? I want to be a musician, but I have no rhythm. Most importantly, that's saying character drives the intellect. That is, what do I want? Now figure out how to do it. So intellect, which is my opportunity to get over myself, as you recall the koach ma, it's the ability to go and import something that's outside of me. It's the closest thing I have to infinite. And therefore, it's the ticket to being aligned with the infinity of Hashem. And as long as it is dragged down to serve my impulses, it is, as we might say, missing the point. It's missing the point because it's serving my impulse. This is what I want, now figure out how to do it, as opposed to saying, let's get outside of myself, now get excited about that. So a classic sign of Sitra Achra, which again does not have to be evil in the way we describe it, is it begins with the character and the mind is conscripted to figure out what the character wants. So to use a very overly simplistic example, animals only eat raw grass because they don't have intellect. Human beings can make the wonderful food because we have intellect. But is that really the difference? That we can have cooked hot food and they can only have raw grass? Meaning we've used our intellect to serve our character. That's a sign of Sitra Achra. How does it start to manifest itself? What are some of the ways in which it starts to manifest itself? Because our character is going to be commensurate with that type of seichel. So if my seichel is a Torah-driven seichel, which again, it's not that the topic is Torah, because a person can be just as selfish in the study of Torah topics. We mean if my pursuit is getting outside of myself, surrendering my identity, engaging intellect to get outside of myself to something greater than myself, then it will result in uplifting everything about myself. But if my seichel is driven to satisfy the impulses of my character, so then my seichel is going to be dragged down to the character and the character of my character is the only word, to the parameters of my character. So if my character is very self-centered and childish, my seichel is going to be driven to that as well. And again, maybe not, but unfortunately, probably we've all encountered someone just like this. They can be very intelligent. They can be very, pardon me, accomplished and know a lot, but it is driven by their character. And if it's driven by their character, it's going to reflect that character. And if the character is obsessed with the immediate, let's put it that way, like the child wants the toy and not the bond that's in the bank somewhere because they don't understand what it is. And it's always about, well, you didn't give me what I want. So then the seichel is never going to expand beyond that. I mean, again, very overly simplified illustration of this American process. You got to go to school. Why? Because you have to do well in school. Why? So you get into college. Why? So you get into graduate school. Why? So you get a job. Why? So you'll have a house and furniture. Oh, so it's all driven to what am I going to get? Well, what if I can just get it some other way? Oh, okay. Meaning we have again in this overly simplified presentation of the human animating side, there's no sense of virtue. It's just, well, that's the way you get a house and a couch and food. And since you like those things, that's what drives you. So again, you go to school and so on, so that you can sit on the couch. Well, why can't I just bypass that and sit on the couch? And again, we just have to look around to the broader secular society where people are saying, well, right, I mean, if I have to go to school to support a family, well, what do I got to have a family for? I'll just stay home by myself. Then I won't have to work so hard. So I mean, this is the world that we're living in, right? Outside in the secular world, people are not getting married and having children because, well, it's too expensive. And I don't want to work so hard. Meaning it's all driven about, how hard I got to work to get all the stuff I want. Well, I want less stuff and I won't work so hard. So here the Alter Rebbe is describing that the intellect is driven by the character. This is all signs of Sitra Achra. The character is driven by the impulse. So he's interested in childish things. And again, very much our society. We don't have a high level of, I'm talking about general, broader American society, not us, we're perfect, but this sense of immaturity, grown adults playing with toys and so on, etc. Whatever it is, it's easy to criticize other people, not me, of course, for their childishness. Not even childlikeness, but childishness. Why? Because that's what our society is driven by. It's driven by what do you got to do? Again, I don't be too distracted, but when Kennedy says, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. Well, we would say, ask not what the world can do for me, but what I can do for the world. Well, that's not a value that's held in any kind of esteem in our broader society. And in a certain sense, for a secular concept, it does touch upon this idea. Are we here to be served or are we here to serve? Are we here to be in the service of self or something else? Okay. So when a person engages in these, and here you see, curiously, when the Alter Rebbe lays it out, he says when a person thinks or speaks or does, and the or there is very important, which we'll point out in a moment. So here it starts from thought, speech, action. So then again, their thoughts, their speech, and their action, and all their commensurate tools become aligned with the thought, speech, and action. But then when the Alter Rebbe sort of plays this out, he says, at the time of the deed or word or thought. So now he starts from the bottom up. So again, this is another indicator how we can identify whether an impulse is coming from the godly or from the sitra achra. One is, does it start in the intellect and it tries to shape the character, or does it start in the character and try to shape the intellect? Again, the intellect is not how many pages of Torah I know. It is the willingness to get over myself. It is the willingness to get outside of myself. So if it comes, this is what I want. Now let me figure out how to get it. That's coming from within the self. And again, it's not so simplistic. It doesn't knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm the Sitra Achra here to ruin your life." It always presents itself like it's virtuous and godly. But these are the first indicators. Does this come from something outside of me, a godly thought, or it comes from within me? Does it come from the service of something greater than self, or does it come from within self? And then you see how the Alter Rebbe lays it out, because in practice, the animal soul, and again, Sitra Achra, animating human soul, always begins with the deed, because that's the most stimulating for the Sitra Achra, is the deed, and then the word, and then the thought, which, as you see here again, the Alter Rebbe adds the O, or, in between each of them, because even if I'm not fully engaged, sometimes a person can be so fully engaged in something, it's all they think about, it's all they talk about, it's all they do. So they see how they've become aligned with this source, whether it's the godly soul, good source, or the animating human soul, not such good source. They become aligned with it when in their conscious thought, their spoken word, and their deed. But here the Alter Rebbe, in both circumstances, says, even if it's one and not the other, meaning even if it's just chit chat, I'm not really engaged in it. I'm just chatting, or I'm just doodling, or just daydreaming. And again, what is the classic pushback of the Sitra Achra? It's not so bad. Come on. It's a minimization and a justification. So even when it's only, I'm just daydreaming, I'm just chatting, I'm just doodling something, I'm not like fully invested in it. Well, again, this is not in alignment. It's like the guy checking the phone. I'm listening. What? Checking the phone. There's a distraction there. There's a separation. And that distraction and separation is a distraction and separation from the infinity of Hashem. So I don't want my dentist on the phone when he's doing the root canal, right? I want him to be fully focused on what we're doing here. This is that idea. And that's what the Alter Rebbe quotes Shlomo HaMelech. You see the quote here from Koheles. I saw all the deeds that were done under the sun, and behold, everything is vanity and frustration, roes ruach, a breaking spirit. Now, what does Shlomo HaMelech mean, under the sun? There's nothing new under the sun. You've probably all heard these expressions, and this is repeated. Now, a little context about the book of Koheles, in case people are not familiar with it. So Koheles, which means the community, in English it's called Ecclesiastes, which means Koheles, means the community, is written by Shlomo HaMelech, but he doesn't identify himself immediately, although he says the son of David, the king. It's clearly Shlomo HaMelech, because he's sort of giving a message at sort of the end of his life that this is for the entire community. And a very simplified summary of his message is, I have pursued all of these other activities, and I found them all to be vanity and frustration. Why? What's the key here? Like, it sounds almost like what's the word I'm looking for? My word retention. It's like defeatist. It's like, forget it. I've done everything, and nothing is anything good. But the key is under the sun. That's the key phrase. Now, of course, where else would you be? Nobody can get above the sun. It seems almost silly to say it. What does that mean? Well, the point is, under the sun, there's nothing new under the sun, is if we remain under the sun. That is, we only remain within the world that is limited by the natural. So those things always expire. You can't do anything new. Anything that's purely under the sun, that is not for something greater, goes away. Again, to use a very harsh analogy, it's like an animal. An animal doesn't live for anything beyond this moment. So it eats, it sleeps, it has its young, it cares for them, and then it dies. And that's it. There is no aspiration for anything greater than that moment. And as Hashem tells us that while sins may linger for 2 or 3 generations, mitzvahs linger for thousands, which means essentially eternally for thousands of generations. Why? Because they're not under the sun. Time and gravity are undefeated. Nobody gets outside of time and nobody gets outside of gravity. To be harsh, that's where it all winds up. But if all our deeds are only under the sun, so then that's right. Then our life becomes only about what is under the sun. And again, only have to look, not that I'm encouraging it, to a secular society. That's all they're interested in. They're not interested in anything beyond themselves. Again, another reason why people are not having children, because they're not interested in anything outside of themselves, beyond themselves. So again, there's a million reasons, and everything this isn't a condemnation of everybody. I'm just talking about an overly generalized idea, and that idea of selflessness, of being of service, whatever we can do, all the socio anthropological studies about why people have no sense. Again, I'm talking about in the very broad sense of secular society, because it's all under the sun. And this is what Shlomo HaMelech, who had everything you could imagine under the sun, is saying. All that stuff that's under the sun will always disappoint you. It will always be a breaking spirit. So this is the classic illustration. The Sitra Achra is only interested in things that are under the sun. They're only interested in the immediate. And the Nefesh Elokis is looking to get outside of the sun, outside of the parameters of time and space, through the portal is the intellect. And again, not how much Torah I know, but my willingness to imagine something beside myself. And if we are able to do that, then we can incorporate it. And then we can change everything. So again, the godly soul, a hallmark is the mind rules the heart. A hallmark of the animal soul is the heart rules the mind. All right, we'll stop here.